Well, Admiral Tidd, thank you so much for joining us today. So can you tell us what are your top priorities?
Well, it's a pleasure to be with you today and to have the opportunity to talk about the important work that U.S. SOUTHCOM takes on board. Obviously, the most important thing that we focus on are countering threat networks. Those are threat networks that may be engaged in criminal activities, in terrorist activities, or everything in between. After that, I would probably have to say our ability to respond to a humanitarian crisis, which unfortunately in the SOUTHCOM region, which is prone to hurricanes, to fires, floods, earthquakes, all manner of natural disasters, we need to be able to respond very, very rapidly. And lastly, it's dealing with countries that are engaged in a competition for influence within our region. Most notably, Russia, China, and Iran, very actively engaged in our part of the world, and it's something that we focus on.
Okay, thank you, Admiral. And a constant theme for SOUTHCOM is trust. How does trust help the SOUTHCOM to remain the partner of choice in Central and South America and the Caribbean?
Well, you know, there's no secret about the fact that when you're working in an environment that involves many partner nations, but also involves many of our own interagency partners, the law enforcement community, intelligence community, and of course our strong partners in the State Department, if we don't have trust, we're not going to be able to operate effectively. So every day we take a look at what are the things that we can do to create trust where perhaps it doesn't exist, to be able to sustain trust, and then finally to be able to make sure that we do nothing that compromises that trust.
Thank you, Admiral. And you mentioned about the threats from the networks, and you have mentioned that Latin America and the Caribbean, the biggest security challenge confronting the U.S. comes from these networks used by criminals and terrorists. How is SOUTHCOM going after these networks, and are there signs that it's working?
Well, this is a change in focus. In the past, I think SOUTHCOM previously had been identified as focusing almost exclusively on a single commodity, notably drugs and cocaine in our case. We recognized, though, that what we need to be able to do is focus on the networks that are engaged in moving those illicit products. They may be criminal networks that are purely motivated for economic reasons. They may be ideologically motivated networks, terrorist groups. And what we're finding more and more is that there are crossing of lines between them, and there are nodes in which they both find themselves. And so by reorganizing ourselves to take a counter-threat network approach, that allows us to pull together a team that's made up of members of our operational directorate, our intelligence directorate, as well as all of the law enforcement officers that are assigned to our headquarters into a single group. We're also working very, very closely with the Joint Terrorism Task Force in Miami, headed up by the FBI, and building a stronger partnership with the FBI, who in Miami has responsibility throughout all of Latin America. We find that that's is another group of like-minded individuals who are focused on threat networks. And then our relationship with the Department of Homeland Security. Most notably, Homeland Security is responsible for the U.S. Coast Guard, and the Coast Guard makes up the vast majority of all of the maritime forces that we have available to operate in the SOUTHCOM region. But also, there are other elements within Department of Homeland Security that we work with very, very closely that in the law enforcement world. The HSI, the folks that are engaged in an operation that is attempting to reduce the flow of individuals coming from countries where we have some concerns about their ability to vet the backgrounds. And so this is, we're directly supporting Department of Homeland Security in that effort.
Okay, thank you. And then, sir, are you concerned about China, Russia, and Iran in your region, and what threats do they pose to regional stability?
Well, as a nation, we have recognized that these are nations that have a global plan. And we have had some concerns about the activities of these countries. In the case of Russia, obviously very concerned about what they are doing in Syria and in Eastern Europe. In China, their actions in the South China Sea. Iran, obviously, as a state sponsor of terrorism, we've been very concerned about them for a number of years. So if we're concerned about them on a global scale, that means we need to make sure that we pay attention to what they are doing in the Latin America region. All three of those countries are present and very active, and so we just want to make sure that as they engage in activities, we are mindful of that, and that particularly where they are attempting to displace the United States as the partner of choice among our friends in the region, that we are better partners, because we think that we have a more compelling message, and our partners will want to work with us, and we just need to make sure that we make it easier for them to do that.
Okay, thank you. How does your military imperatives enhance professionalism of the militaries, and why is this important to the region?
You know, we have partners in this part of the world that are very capable. They are very well trained. They have good equipment. And so we have been working with them on a number of areas as we all collectively attempt to develop a force that is prepared to deal with the security challenges of the 21st century. We've long recognized at U.S. SOUTHCOM the importance of human rights and a profound respect for human rights. And we work with our partners to ensure that underpins their way of doing business. Most importantly, because a respect for human rights will connect them and provide the legitimacy that they need so that they are viewed by their populations as protectors and not as predators. Secondly, the development of the Senior Non-Commissioned Officer Corps is absolutely critical to any military that purports itself to be a modern military. We all recognize that the backbone of the United States military is our Senior Non-Commissioned Officer Corps. That's the secret sauce that makes the American military the force to be reckoned with that it is. And it's because that's the force that enforces standards across the entire population of the military. So it's critically important that we work with our partner nations to help them develop a strong, well-educated, and well-developed Senior Non-Commissioned Officer Corps. The third military imperative is the ability to effectively integrate women into the militaries. And we think that's critically important, most importantly because qualified women who are parts of our military give us the ability to solve problems and to tackle difficult situations in unique and creative ways that we would not otherwise be able to. And so the classic case in point that we offer up is the terrific work that was done by our cultural support teams that were attached to our special operations forces in Iraq and Afghanistan that gave us the ability to gather critical intelligence and to connect with the populations that we were working with in unique ways that we would not have been able to do otherwise. So we think that one of the hallmarks of a modern military is the ability to effectively integrate women into the militaries of the future. And the final military imperative that we talk about is jointness and an understanding of the importance of working together. This has been a long path that the United States military has been following for a number of decades. Our partners throughout the region, in many cases, are at the start of that path to understand that no single service has the resources or will have the resources to deal with the security challenges of the future. They must be able to work together in full partnership. But more importantly now, they must be able to work together with all of their security forces, whether it's their law enforcement, their intelligence programs, to be able to work together as a unified team. We think that is the key to success of a modern force. These four military imperatives, we believe, are completely interdependent. You can't pick out one or two of them. They all
are using existing migrant smuggling rings in Latin America to gain entry to the U.S. across the Mexican border.
Well, let me say, rather than talking about the Mexican border, because as you'll appreciate, the U.S.-Mexican border is the responsibility of my U.S. Northern Command counterpart, General Lloyd Robinson. But let me just talk instead about threat networks themselves. And one of the reasons why we have taken a counter-threat network approach, it allows us to look strategically at all of these networks. And as we have done so, we have discovered that there are, in fact, terrorists that are taking advantage of some of these networks to be able to move in the direction of the United States. One of the reasons that we've taken this approach is to be able to determine just exactly what the extent of it is, and then to be able to focus the efforts of our partner nations' law enforcement and military and our own law enforcement to be able to disrupt those efforts. But the first step is to put in place our own friendly network that is able to better detect the movement of these people. There has long been a belief that the phenomenon of ISIS was somehow isolated to the Middle East or to North Africa. The reality is ISIS is present here in our hemisphere. And just as we discovered and our partners in Europe discovered with the terrible attacks that occurred in Paris and in Brussels and in San Bernardino and in Orlando, the phenomenon of radicalization is something that can occur in any of our countries here in this region. And so we are all now taking this threat very seriously and beginning to share information more effectively so that we can get after this problem.
Okay, thank you. At the Surface Navy Association National Symposium, you made the point that we need to grow and incentivize innovation-minded junior officers that would challenge traditional naval paradigms through mentally agile approaches and emerging problems. What sort of incentives would you propose to allow junior officers to meet that challenge?
Well, you know, that's a challenge that I suspect over the last certainly the 39 years of my Navy career has been something that has been identified as something we need to do. The challenge that we have, obviously, is how do you take tradition-based organizations but be able to pull in creative ideas, new ways of looking at problems. We have some incredibly talented individuals within our enlisted and our junior officer corps, and we've got to be able to harvest them to be able to help us deal in a resource-constrained environment. So at SOUTHCOM, we're trying a number of different experiments to see if we can connect people with good ideas into our decision-making process in order for us to be able to move forward. We're not there yet by a long stretch, and I wouldn't necessarily say that we've solved this problem, but we're tackling it and working on it very hard by trying to make it easier for people with ideas to bring them up to the level of the commander, of me, so that we can listen to those ideas, figure out how they might play in new ways of doing business and take them forward.
Okay, thank you. And so the question that we added on, are there any major exercises upcoming this year or maybe in the next year or two or in the near future that follow your key priorities?
You know, the most important exercise that we run in U.S. Southern Command is an exercise that practices the defense of the Panama Canal. Countries across the region, but frankly around the world, recognize the critical importance that the Panama Canal plays in the free flow of economic trade between the Atlantic and the Pacific. And so we bring together countries from across the region to be able to work together in a cohesive manner. This last year, the Panamax exercise 2016, for the first time, all of our subordinate commanders were commanded by countries from across the region. So our most capable partners, Brazil, Chile, Peru, Colombia, played significant roles in commanding the key components of the exercise. As we look forward, we look for further opportunities to continue to refine the way that we will work together so that whether it's for a military operation or perhaps a disaster response, that we know how to work together, we plug in well, we understand each other's capabilities, and we have that critical trust that we spoke about earlier, that we would be able to function as an effective military organization.
Okay, thank you, Admiral. Is there anything else that you'd like to add that we didn't touch on?
Well, I think it's very important that we continue to remind ourselves of the critical mission that is carried out by the men and women who at Joint Task Force Guantanamo Bay. I'm exceptionally proud of the work that JTF Gitmo does. They're engaged in a very difficult and sensitive mission of guarding law of war detainees. They do that job with significant challenge, and it's a tough job, but every single day they approach it with discipline and professionalism. And so I think it's critically important that we all recognize the work that they are doing so that when they come home from those deployments, they are given exactly the same amount of credit for the tough job that they have done, because they're in this war every bit as much as the men and women who deployed to Afghanistan and to Iraq. And I want to make sure that when they come home from Guantanamo Bay, that across this country they are given the same credit for having done what the nation has asked them to do. If I could also talk about the critical role at U.S. SOUTHCOM that we play in working together with our interagency partners as well as with our military partners in neighboring combatant commands. Of course, the relationship with U.S. NORTHCOM is critically important. The NORTHCOM commander is directly responsible for the defense of the United States. Our mission is to work that problem further downrange and to make sure that threats don't get any closer to the United States than absolutely necessary. So we share information on a regular basis. We make sure that there is a free flow of understanding of exactly where these threat networks are operating and how they might pose a direct threat to the United States. We work very closely with our partners at U.S. Pacific Command, our partners in U.S. European Command and U.S. Africa Command, as well as Central Command, to be able to understand where these global threat networks are located, how they operate, and how they pose a threat on a global basis.
Okay, thank you very much, Admiral. Thank you for your time.